I'm Lynn Tepper. I was raised in Massapequa, Long Island, New York. I have an older brother, 6 years older than me, who is an amazing role model. He is a missionary and developed an international free Christian drug rehab program in 24 countries. We always joke, he says he has his congregation and I have mine. I was raised with lots of family members. My mother was one of 11, and since her mother was killed early, my uncles and aunts lived with us. So I was raised with always having somebody that was either sharing my home or sharing my room. I was raised with, sometimes we'd have a housekeeper who had been a victim of violence. My mother would go and rescue her, and she'd live in my room with me. Or when the Cubans were arriving during the Castro Revolution, we had a Cuban refugee in our home. And my mother's home was full of entertainment and lots of doctors and lawyers and lots of entertainment. My parents divorced when I was 9, and my stepfather, who came into the family when I was 13, when I was 40, for his 80th birthday, I gave him a petition to adopt me. And a couple of weeks later, on my 40th birthday, Judge Cobb did the adoption. That was huge because I thought I was changing who I was by changing who my father was, but I kept my name, and it was wonderful. I was very blessed to be raised by a nurturing community, a nurturing group of family and friends. My grandfathers periodically lived with me, took care of me, and taught me how to play poker, and it was a blessed life.
You went to Bard College in Annandale-on-Hudson. What did you major in?
I was a drama dance major, which means that I acted. I became a set designer, particularly a lighting designer. I built light boards. I did modern dance. I did some ballet. I was a stage manager and a production manager. Of course, the joke has been by friends that have come in to see me in court wondering what I was doing with that background, and then when I was on the bench they said, "Oh, I see, you're the production manager, you're the stage manager, and you're doing a little bit of acting too." And it helped me as a trial attorney. It was a tremendous benefit, and on the campaign trail, because as my friends say, I'll talk to a rock, and I have no hesitance in speaking up.
I'm going to ask you about your campaigning a little bit further on, but I'd like to know, how did you get from Bard College to Florida?
I graduated in May of 1974, and I was trying to negotiate with other graduates the start of a dinner theater in upstate New York, and we were negotiating contracts, and I thought, they're trying to take advantage of us. And I had friends who were graduating that were trying to get into law school, and I thought, well, see, I was National Honor Society, I'm smart, I could go to law school, I'll learn how to negotiate my own contracts, nobody will ever take advantage of me again. And so in August, I said, I'm going to try to go to law school. In August, you can't get into law school in September, I discovered. And lo and behold, Dennis DeVlaming, an attorney in Clearwater, was like an older brother to me, and I grew up with him, and he had gone to Stetson, so I'd heard of Stetson. And Stetson was the only law school in the country I found that would take you in January. And I didn't want to wait once I made up my mind, and I applied to Stetson, and I applied to the University of Texas that would have taken me in April. And I got into Stetson in January of January 1975. That's what brought me, and I never left.
Had you ever been to Florida?
I lived here for a year when I was about 9 years old. But that was in the Miami area, and we had vacation periodically in Florida.
While you were in law school, did you have a favorite class?
Oh, the trial practice was my favorite. I did the PD clinic, but all of the trial classes, once I experienced that, I wanted to be a tax attorney. And once I decided I wasn't going to do entertainment law, I took every tax class I could, and then I took a trial class, and that was it for me. I just decided I'd be the best trial lawyer in the state.
What was your least favorite class?
It would have to be real estate.
What was so bad about that?
Ken Deacon was a wonderful professor, but it just didn't charm me or entice. It wasn't it just didn't hold my attention.
And after law school, you did some clerking?
I was Judge Pasquet's, the chief bankruptcy judge at the time for the Middle District. I was his first law clerk. He actually didn't even have a law clerk. It was really paid as a secretarial position. I shared an office with him, and he had selected another Stetson student. And there we were in the attic of the original federal building, sitting in his office, helping write briefs, sitting in court with him sometimes. And that was the start of it. And then I was an assistant to the editor twice on 2 editions of his bankruptcy book.
How long did you clerk?
I just clerked from July until January. In other words, I was waiting for the outcome of the bar.
Okay. You passed the bar and you went right into private practice?
No, I actually went to work for the public defender's office. I worked in, I was in the Newport Richey office, and just before I started work for them, I had married County Judge Bill Sestak, and he went to work in Dade City. I went to work in Newport Richey, and we lived in Dade City, and that's how we ended up staying in this area.
How did you decide you wanted to work at the public defender's office? How'd that come about?
Well, I clinicked in Pinellas County for Bob Jagger, and I really enjoyed the work.
Mr. Jagger was the longest serving public defender
and the
in
original.
The original.
And so I had worked under him, and I mean, and keep in mind, I had Susan Schaefer was, on the A team in those days for the public defender's office, and you could observe trials. And I just ate it up, and I had wonderful experiences interviewing clients, preparing, and actually going to trial. And one of my favorite experiences was in front of Judge White. I argued against the constitutionality of a statute, and he seemed to get a big kick out of it. He denied it, but he thought I was at least being innovative, and it was a wonderful experience.
Now, being a clerk, you didn't do trial advocacy stuff, did you? Was there anything? It seemed like you're very interested in. You've always been interested in trial,
Mm-hmm.
and then you went into a clerkship, which is a lot of paper. I guess a better way to ask is, what did you learn as a result of your clerkship that's applicable to your service as a judge?
I was always outspoken in Judge Pasquet's class, and so he contacted me and said, "How would you like to be my clerk while you're waiting to pass the bar?" And he taught me how to write an order. It was invaluable. I found that as an attorney, I could write an order better than others, and to submit it, the findings of facts, the conclusions of law, applying the law. It was fascinating to watch and to read what he did, and that was the best basis for me. It also taught me to be very cautious about your demeanor on the bench. Judge Pasquet was infamous for horrific looks while somebody was testifying, so I learned what not to do as well.
How long were you at the public defender's office?
I was there for 2 years and 4 months. I was required, Bob Jagger had me resign once I announced that I was running against an incumbent judge before the office and I was practicing. And during that time, I had tried over 50 jury trials, which was more than any of the opponents I was running against had tried in 10 years.
What led you to decide to run against a sitting judge?
The impact on individuals who were appearing in court was tremendously impacted by how they were treated by the judge. I saw that being arrogant, treating people indignantly, whether they were a lawyer, an out-of-town attorney, or an individual who appeared before the court on whatever the charge was. And I thought, people deserve to be treated better than that, and that's why my original slogan was justice with dignity. I also thought we should be more accountable. In those days, there was no supervised probation. Nobody was assuring that you got into your counseling, that you paid your restitution, that you were accountable other than the clerk, and it really wasn't their job. And that's why I decided to run at 27 years of age, 2 years and 4 months in Pasco County and as an attorney. It was before the 5-year rule.
Okay, and so you were elected?
No, I ran and lost.
Okay.
I ran and lost, and it was a 4-way race. lost only by 2.25% of the vote. I beat out the other two experienced attorneys. And then I went into private practice, which was an extraordinary experience on many levels. But then when I ran again in 4 years, when they created a new seat, back in those days there was one county judge in Dade City and one in Newport Richey. They created a second judgeship, and I ran, and as it was, against Judge Sultan, who lost to me and the then president of the Bar Association over here, and I won outright in the first primary to the county bench. I served for 4 years, and then I ran at the request of some of the attorneys. They approached me to run against a long-term incumbent, and he decided to retire. He was ready to retire instead of having opposition, and I ran unopposed took office as a circuit judge in January of '89, and I ran unopposed all the years after that.
So, how many years have you been a circuit judge at this point?
30 years come December as a circuit, and then 4 as a county.
So 34 years on the bench.
That's right.
All right. And at what point in your life did you start thinking about becoming a judge?
It's interesting. I didn't think of becoming a judge until I practiced law. And when I was in private practice, I went to many jurisdictions, saw many different judges, and I was really taken by the good, the bad, the positive, the negative that could occur with the treatment from the court, and also the disparate treatment from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So that motivated me. I became very involved in the community from what is now Baycare. I was the board president when we couldn't pay salaries for the Human Development Center. And so mental health became a tremendous concern of mine and need in the community. I became much more involved in recognizing the needs in the community. But looking back over, for instance, with my childhood, the joke was always that I wanted to see justice done. I would come home from school in elementary school, and my mother would say, "Did you have to yell at the teacher again today?" I said, "But it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. She was accusing this child of this or that, and it wasn't fair." Or I would come home from high school, and she'd go, "Did you have to make this statement in the yearbook about this person?" "But Mom, she cheated. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair." And then in college, I formed a pet commission to judge people who were neglecting and abandoning their animals in college. So apparently I always had it in my blood, and I just didn't realize it.
What divisions have you worked in as a judge?
Every single division for at least a few years at a time.
Do you have a favorite?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. I like working with children and families. Technically, we don't have a unified family court in Dade City. I have a Project 1 court, which is one of 6 sites in the United States that I applied for, that was selected by the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And it's like a unified family court, but on steroids with a big dose of trauma-informed approaches.
Has being a judge been what you expected?
Even more.
How so?
The impact isn't just whether that person's going to lose their job because they've gone to jail. It isn't whether they're going to go to prison and lose their home and lose a lot of privileges by being a felon. I have found, now that I'm on my 3rd generation, that it impacts generation after generation. We either can try to get it right, head people in the right direction, or we'll just assure that we're going to be opening a pathway to the state prison system.
What's been your biggest surprise about judging?
All the paperwork.
What have you liked most about being a judge?
To be able to be here, I get a little emotional about this. I've lived in the same community for 41 years, and I've been on the bench 34. I'll go to a function, a talent show at the Boys and Girls Club, and during intermission the lights will come up and a woman in front of me will turn and say, aren't you Judge Tepper? And I go, yes, I am. She'll go, well, do you recognize me? I'll say, no, I'm sorry, perhaps you've changed your hair. And she'll say, well, I'm 34 now. I saw you when I was 16. She said, these are my twin sons. And I always say now, I go, I'm much kinder now than I was then. She goes, no. And she'll recount the experience. She goes, and I've never been in trouble since, Judge. Or I'm fortunate enough that I believe I'm approachable by people, so I get lots of cards and letters, not just a couple years later. I will get them 5 years, 10 years later. This past year, I received an invitation to a college graduation from the young man who I had awarded his custody to his father. And his father wrote me and thanked me and said he couldn't imagine how life would have turned out if I hadn't awarded him custody. He sent me the invitation. I wrote him back and I sent a graduation card to his son. His son wrote me and said, I can't even begin to imagine how life would have turned out if you hadn't had me live with my dad. And because I live in a small community, I'll go to any place and I might run into somebody, and even my husband will say, they'll say, you're married to Judge Tepper, and he's not sure what they're going to say, and they'll say, well, she gave me custody of my kids, and everything's turned out well. And that's very satisfying to know that it made a difference for somebody to come up to the bench and say, as you congratulate them on their success, and they say, I want you to know, and I knew they'd lost 7 other children, and for them to say, if I had been somewhere else, I'm not sure I would have succeeded. Thank you. And other people confirmed the transformation that we as a community made. The impact is tremendous, so satisfying.
What's been the biggest challenge as a judge?
Challenge, well, of course, paperwork is a challenge. Sometimes coloring within the lines is a challenge for me, and so I sometimes break out of the lines.
Okay. What's the most unusual case you've ever presided over?
One of my cases was featured on the Saturday Night Live Weekend Update. And there was the byline from our newspaper. I had an incest case. I had a brother and sister who had gotten together and had 9 children. None of them had an IQ above 74. And the brother, the oldest, the brother, he was a few years older than his sister, they were from the Miami area. He used to sit under a pyramid with the belief that it brought him special strengths, and all of the family lived on a converted school bus. That was a very unusual case.
Your reputation is that of an innovator. What are the innovations that have earned you this reputation?
Well, most recently, of course, is the trauma-informed approach. I've learned about trauma-informed impacts, adverse childhood experiences, through my co-teaching with Dr. Mimi Graham from FSU, and the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges stresses that with my Project One, so I've gained additional education, and through them, I've twice had trauma assessments of how we conduct court, meetings with the various partners, and the courthouse. And I believe that as a result of that, I made additional improvements on how we as a building, how we as a system approach individuals. So that was, to me, was very important. And I was part of the original implementation of the Unified Family Court once the Supreme Court 2001 opinion came around. But even before that, I was active in the American Bar Association and had attended a meeting out west, and Dr. Michael Town was the first judge that created the Unified Family Court concept, and I heard somebody from Hawaii speak, and I'm like, wow, we can do this. And I came back and I volunteered for the whole county. Back then, I did all of the domestic violence, all the juveniles on both sides of the county. That was the start of it, and I think it was an important innovation, and I hope one that will stay with the system.
What's been your greatest honor?
The being recognized that our community was worthy of being a Project One court, and not only did they keep us for 3 years as they were supposed to, they've extended it, and I think we're on our 6th or 7th year now. And in the trauma assessment that they did, the first one, they had these experts from out west that work for national counsel, PhDs and others come and meet with everybody. And one of the PhDs said, you know, I wasn't going to come. I don't go to these things. But I was reading, I send out a lot of information, as people know, that I think is important on brain science, on relationships, innovative practices from various sources. And she said, I was reading what you were sending, so I thought, well, I'll come. And she said, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not impressed easily. But she said, I've been to New York, I've been all over the country looking at courts. And she said, I have to tell you, I think this is one of the most trauma-informed courthouse I've seen. That meant a great deal to me. And I learned even from that visit more we could do, and we just try to keep improving it.
You've had some significant health challenges over your career, particularly as to your eyesight. What effect has this had on the way you've gone about being a judge?
When you read for a living, it's very difficult, and I've had now 39 different eye procedures, and sometimes your healing requires that you not do as much reading. I was a challenge for anybody because my eyes were always back and forth reading. I read all day, I read at night, I read for enjoyment, and I had to go through a period of time because all my reading was interfering. I had to stop reading, and I had a reader, but then I would read over her shoulder, and that was creating problems. So I actually conducted hearings for a period of time from home on a speakerphone. Almost everybody agreed to let me do it, and they would just read me the synopsis of the facts, and I would take testimony and make decisions. That certainly was a challenge. I must say I virtually lost no time on the bench because of that, because we would work out surgery so it wouldn't interfere. And then later, the last couple of years, I have had hearing challenges, and I have hearing aids now. But I think there's a lot of us on the bench that have that issue.
Okay. Let me ask about the long view as a judge. Has anything about the courtroom and the people in it changed over your time as a judge?
Obviously, technology has changed tremendously. The technology has changed because we can do hearings by phone without a difficulty. We can consult in our computers, whether we need to pull up something immediately from the Florida courts website, pull up a statute, whether we can pull up our own dockets and calendar, or look at all of the documents in a file easily. But also, the evidence that has been presented and what comes to us is significantly different. We used to wonder, well, what do you do when somebody wants to introduce a social media posting? We had to learn all of that. Stalking electronically came into existence. So that has been a tremendous change. And not signing papers when some of our divisions are signed electronically, quite a change.
Do you have a sense of whether the general public's perception of judges has changed over the time that you've been on the bench?
I believe it has. Well, of course, when I became a judge, there were very few women. I was the first woman elected within Pasco County, and so there was a perception it was old men, old white-haired men, but also there was almost like a reverence to judges in those days. Although I have to tell you, in Dade City, in the old courthouse, they had spittoons, and if folks came in their overalls, because we're rural over here. But the approachability didn't exist then. There was a distance that was practiced and believed to be the best route. That's not how I practice. That's not how a lot of judges practice. I have an early childhood court, and Pinellas County has one, and the judges that do that are very interactive, having children come up and speak with you, everybody being able to communicate openly in court, orderly but openly. That is a vast change, and therefore the perception is almost that they think they can contact you all the time, so I get letters and a stream of contact that we have to then get some order out of.
Has judging become more difficult over the time that you've served as a judge? Not for you personally, but judging in general.
Oh, I believe there's vast differences. When I used to practice family law, you could get alimony, custody, child support set without any specifics. You could say, I think I'm going to award $500 a month child support. I'm going to give you the child. There were no criteria. There was no requirement of written findings. I think those are good changes. So that was a significant change. And then there was the sentencing guidelines. I practiced before there were sentencing guidelines, and they came into existence for very good reason, and I saw the discrimination in some of my clients. But it is a guidance for a judge as long as you have some leeway. And then, of course, in the dependency field, judges now have to decide under many circumstances whether a child in care should take these psychotropic meds, has to appoint attorneys ad litem to be their best interest attorneys, things that we never had to do before. Significant change.
Have judges in the courts become more powerful or less powerful over the time that you've served as a judge?
In many ways, I think we have become more powerful. There are, interestingly, with dependency cases, child abuse cases, I find that there are far more termination of parental rights cases, and the law and the statutes have changed that give the ability to upfront terminate parental rights. That did not used to exist. We have timelines that are guides that make a big difference. I used to have kids that would be in foster care for 10 and 12 years. Now we have an expectation of permanency in 12 months. So that power over family and that child is significant. And then we have the death penalty issue. The question of whether it is ultimately up to the judge or the jury has been in flux, of course, over the years. That's significant.
What are the most common courtroom mistakes that you've seen on the part of attorneys?
They don't listen. They don't listen to the witnesses. They need to hear what is being said so then they can determine whether or not they have to ask the next question. And that's particularly true, I find it, on critical witnesses, be it in a criminal case or in a family law case. They don't prep their clients for testimony, but more importantly, they feed into their clients' emotional desires as opposed to giving them realistic expectations of what could or could not happen under the law.
Are attorney first impressions lasting with judges?
They can be. Some attorneys that have not come off positively initially have gained my respect in time, and I have learned not to prejudge by just the first impression. But an attorney that is misleading the court on a regular basis, or is a lot of noise and no substance and not following proper legal procedures, is making a lasting impression and rarely changes.
How does an attorney make a good first impression on a judge?
When I went to different jurisdictions, I'd always walk into chambers and say hi, and I'd introduce myself. I'd let them know where I was from. But of course, coming prepared and preparing your client, filing proper motions and not doing a flurry of last-minute papers would make a very good impression on a judge.
What does it take to be a good judge, in your opinion?
Listening. Being an active listener and learning from what you hear by treating people fairly, kindly, and equally, but also making, either by reputation or by what they observe in the court, understand there are certain expectations. You won't interrupt, I won't interrupt. And I find that one of the best things a judge can do is tell people how a process is going to occur, particularly self-represented individuals. There's a lot of nervousness. We have to recognize this is huge to individuals. And if we just take the time to say, okay, this is how we're going to proceed, this is what we're going to do, you'll get a chance to do this, and explain it, you can almost see them take a deep breath and they understand a little bit more how to proceed. So being aware that this may be a routine procedure for us, it is not. It is everything to the individual appearing in front of you.
In your experience, what are the most common mistakes that judges make?
Failure to listen. In other words, I can remember appearing in front of judges where they'd be busy thumbing through a file and reading something. I always read a file in advance. The judges not listening to the parties. not having an orderly courtroom where there are expectations. You can give people an opportunity to be heard, but that doesn't mean they get to run the courtroom. You have to treat everybody equally, and it's real easy. I used to be hometown. I go out of my jurisdiction, and I was appalled. And I try to make a point of not doing that. I think all good judges should do that. And they have to pay attention to detail. If you enter a judgment and you neglect to say a detail that's needed, whether there is a specific date or time something occurs, or child support ends on such and such a date or commences on such and such a date, there are consequences. And I've seen people have license loss through judgments entered in error. Those are why we have to pay attention to detail, and it takes time. And I don't believe that it's our job simply to make sure things run on time. It's to make sure that each case has our full attention, that we've scheduled adequate time for each case, and that if need be, we add time or reschedule so that all of the needs of that current party or family can be met.
So what does it take to be a really good judge?
Patience, kindness. I believe that it's more than just being a judge. I think you have to make sure you have balance in your life, that you're involved in your community. I have a very active, what we call stakeholders group in Dade City, and it's made me a better judge by understanding that we have a farmer self-help group that has its own set of challenges, and that we can impact them for the positive or the negative, that there are resources out there, from where you can get a hot meal to where you can do your laundry, where you can get an ID, where you can go as a felon to get a job. I believe it's my job to help people stay out of the system and get out of the system. And by knowing what's in the community and continuing to meet with the community and build the needs if we don't have it, or share the needs, is critical. My job isn't just to sentence you today. My job is to improve your trajectory so you don't end up back in the system, or your child or your grandchild.
Do you feel that you've made a difference as a judge?
That I've made a difference? I definitely feel that I have made a difference. Obviously, not everybody that appeared in front of me liked the outcome. But it's so gratifying to hear that a parent whose parental rights I terminated when they signed consents will write me many, many years later and say, by the way, Judge, I wanted to let you know. Number one, you made me feel like it was okay that I was doing that. I felt terrible I was giving up my rights, but I wanted you to know that I went to college, I graduated, I married, I have 4 children, my children are doing well. Thank you. Obviously, that makes me believe that I've made the difference in some people's lives for the good.
Do you have any specific plans for after you retire?
Well, of course, I'd like to spend more time with my husband. Many people know I remarried late in life, so my husband lives out of state and I live in Florida, so we'll spend more time together. I'll always call Dade City home, just have a home in 2 states. I will be doing some traveling with him. We hope to do some missionary work with my brother's program around the world, and my husband has family in Europe, as do I. We want to spend time with them. I want to see the national parks. We want to get an RV, an Airstream, and travel. And I'd like to sleep late, and I'll be doing a lot of weeding.
Will you become a senior judge after you retire?
Absolutely. I'm already in the works. I already have a resentencing in a murder case lined up for January. I have an ongoing dependency case that's scheduled for the first part of the year, and I volunteered to my friends that in other parts of the state with dependency that need assistance to go up there.
Finally, do you have any advice for anyone who's seriously considering becoming a judge someday?
Mm-hmm. I believe that there are 2 keys, and that would be to be very involved in your community, understand who's in your community. If you're going to join Rotary just to be known when you're running, don't quit. Become a part of Rotary, become a volunteer. They do wonderful work, or Kiwanis. Whatever organization you join, truly join and be the volunteer to understand your community, to get to know people. And if you really want to know what it takes to be a good judge, try to find an opportunity to practice in front of as many judges as you can, or at least go and sit in courts where you've heard a judge has a good reputation. Even go where a judge has a bad reputation and find out, see firsthand what works and what doesn't. And read. Don't just study the law. For me, I always say I spend a lot of time reading about brain science and child development and nurturing relationships, and that helps me. So whatever field you choose, keep an open mind and know that we could sit in any division, so you need to be abreast of all topics.
Is there any question that you were hoping I would ask that I didn't ask you?
One of the things that I have found can make a tremendous difference that would not be considered traditional with a judge. Many years ago, when I was doing dependency and I had guardian ad litems going into a child's home, I would ask them, did you see any books in the home? I was raised with libraries full of books. There was always reading. And to me, reading is a pathway regardless of your education. And they would always tell me, no, there weren't any books. So I started picking up books at yard sales, at flea markets. My then judicial assistant Connie would do the same, and I started gifting books. And along the way, the then Chief Justice recognized that we were doing that and gave my judicial assistant and I an award that got publicity. And after that, and that's been more than 10 years ago, the books have never stopped coming into the courthouse. And people decided children might enjoy stuffed animals, and they do. No, I have teenage boys ask for stuffed animals. That community connection has been tremendous. The 4-H kids will invite me every year. They clean out their closets and they give me their books. They can almost not stand to part with them. But the children, and we make it a tradition at adoptions to give them a book to commemorate their adoptions. I'd like to think that we're giving them the pathway to lifelong learning by giving books and letting them understand books are important. And it thrills me to hear a young man that I'll run across many years later saying, I still remember the book you gave me, Judge Tepper. It matters.